Hey everybody, this is Ashton Arave, and this is an oral and digital podcast of the book Huckleberry Finn. I recently read the book Huckleberry Finn, which was written by Mark Twain. Mark Twain is not actually his real name, it was Samuel Clemens. Known as the father of American literature, he wrote many famous books including The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, The Prince of the Pauper, and of course, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. This story is narrated by a troubled teen by the name of Huck Finn. This story takes place right before the Civil War. This book is a sequel to The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. In the beginning of the book, Huck finds gold that robbers stole with Tom Sawyer. Huck buries his gold in the backyard of the widow he lives with. He sees footprints in the backyard one day and knows they belong to his father. His father is an abusive, drunk man. Huck takes his gold to a judge and sells it for $1 to keep his father from getting a hold of it. Huck knows he needs to escape. One day he sees an empty canoe and an idea forms in his mind. He breaks the window to his bedroom while his father is in town, hoping that he will think he was murdered and thrown into the lake. He sees Tom, his father, and the widow leave on a ferry, and Huck knows his plan was successful. And they believe he was murdered and will not come back. While in the woods, Huck meets a runaway slave named Jim, and together they find a cavern to live in, desperate to survive. One evening, Huck finds a rattlesnake in the cave and kills it. As a prank, he leaves it in Jim's bed to find later that night. When Jim gets in bed, however, he finds not just the dead rattlesnake, but also its live mate, which bites him. It takes 4 days for Jim to recover. Huck disguises himself as a girl named Sarah Williams and sees what is happening in town. A woman tells him that Huck Finn has been murdered and that there is a search party looking for a slave named Jim. Back at the cavern, Huck tells Jim what he has learned, and they set off down the Mississippi River from Louisiana on a raft. They stop and see a wrecked steamboat on their way and find 3 criminals. They find out their raft has drifted away, so they steal the criminals' boat. After going down the river for a bit, Huck and Jim find their raft again. Huck feels compassion for the stranded criminals, so he tells people at a nearby town about their predicament, and they try to help the criminals. Huck feels good about his efforts to help the criminals and wishes the widow who he used to live with could see him now, and he's sure she would be proud. Jim and Huck's goal is to make it to the north to a free state. They look for a town called Cairo. When a boat looking for runaway slaves meets them, Huck lies to keep Jim safe. Pretending to be a boy named George Jackson, Huck stays with a family named the Grangerfords. But the Grangerfords get into a gunfight with another family, and Huck escapes and finds Jim. 2 men meet Huck and Jim later and say that they are royalty. Huck and Jim act as servants to them and call them the Duke and the King, even though they are not actually royal. The King and the Duke follow Huck and Jim on their journey. The Duke and the King are witty, enjoy tricking the townsfolk, and are always one step ahead. They are known as the con men to Huck and Jim. For example, the King and the Duke pretend to be brothers of a dead man named Peter Wilkes. The King gets a letter of where to find Peter Wilkes' treasure. Peter had 3 daughters, and they entrusted Peter's $6,000 fortune to the con men, who they think are their uncles. However, Huck becomes fond of the girls and steals the money from the Duke and the King and drops it in Peter's coffin. Huck pretends that the slaves stole the money, and the con men believe him. When the con men try to sell Peter's land, Huck tells the girls what happened and where he hid the treasure. Then Huck and the con men set off once again with Jim. At the next town, Huck decides to try to escape from the con men, but he finds out he has been conned, and the King and the Duke have sold Jim to slave owners. Thinking about what a good friend Jim has been to him, Huck once again thinks outside himself and knows he must do something to help his friend. As Huck surveys the Phelps farm where Jim is being held, he is spotted by one of the family's slaves and is mistaken for a visiting nephew. Huck plays along and soon discovers that the nephew he's impersonating is none other than Tom Sawyer. Tom's Aunt Sally and Uncle Silas welcome the new boy into their home as their nephew. Huck is able to find the real Tom Sawyer, and Tom agrees to help him free Jim and pretends to be Sid Sawyer because his family thinks Huck is Tom. Tom and Huck formulate a plan to set Jim free. They steal spoons and start digging a tunnel under Jim's bed. They are able to get Jim through the tunnel, and they run to the woods, but they are seen and shot at with guns. They are able to escape, but Tom gets shot in the calf and needs a doctor. In an act of loyalty, Jim insists on staying with Tom and tells Huck to get the doctor. However, Huck gets trapped back at the Phelps house before the doctor arrives. The doctor is impressed that Jim would stay with Tom and helps him treat his wound, even though he knew staying would cost him his freedom. Tom tells his aunt and uncle that Jim's former owner had died 2 months earlier and that she had it in her will that Jim would be free. They agree to give him his freedom. It turns out that the judge had Huck's gold, still had the $6,000 fortune, and returned it to Huck. Tom suggests that he and Huck head for the Indian territories to have some adventures. At the beginning of the story, Huck Finn is an immature 13-year-old boy who only thinks about himself. During the course of the story, Huck meets many different people who teach him very valuable lessons. He learns loyalty and the value of friendship from Jim. He learns to give second chances and always help others with his experience with the criminals. He learns that the best reward is knowledge that you have done what you know is right. He learns to develop a deeper understanding of morals from his time with the widow. He learns to be resourceful and clever from Tom. His character growth is best illustrated through this quote that he makes near the end of the book. Right is right and wrong is wrong, and a body ain't got no business doing wrong where he ain't ignorant and knows better. Thanks for listening.